I used to believe the worst pain was feeling unseen. I learned there's something harsher when the people who should protect you rewrite reality until you're the villain. As a teenager, I was exiled from my own house because my twin brother staged a narrative about me. Now, at 28, after building a respected career and a life I love, my parents suddenly reappear, saying we're family and hinting I owe them financially. This is how it all unfolded. My twin brother and I entered the world minutes apart, but you'd think we were born into different households. He was anointed the prodigy, the promising heir. I was labeled the difficult one simply because I preferred moving my body, meeting new people, laughing, experimenting, rather than sitting perfectly still with textbooks the way they wanted. The comparisons started early and never let up. Our shared birthday each year felt like a split screen. He got elaborate decorations, groups of boys sleeping over, noise, admiration. I got the leftover candles and the message, "You're secondary." I was often told not to bring friends home, while he was encouraged to. The only person who consistently treated me like I was worthy of kindness was my grandmother, arriving with my favorite chocolates, pressing a few folded bills into my palm so I could buy something that felt like mine. That small affirmation was a lifeline. As we grew older, the bias hardened into open derision. They critiqued my interests, mocked my grades in front of each other like it was a comedy routine, and dismissed anything I enjoyed if it didn't mirror his path. Ironically, I excelled at sports, but they restricted me, insisting I drop teams and clubs to study properly like him. The message, who I naturally was never measured up. The steady erosion of my self-worth happened long before any big explosion. In sophomore year, things intensified over something absurd, having Snapchat on my phone. I wasn't doing anything inappropriate. I just wanted to keep in touch with friends like any other teen. They had decreed minimal contact with peers, so when they discovered the app, it was treated like treason. They ransacked my room, flinging my belongings, then literally removed the door from its hinges. No privacy here until you learn. That singular act symbolized total control. My space reduced to a stage they could walk across at will. My brother used the hostile environment like a chessboard. He learned quickly that a pointed finger in my direction was all it took to redirect trouble away from himself. If something went missing, she did it. If he wanted sympathy, he painted me as volatile. Meanwhile, at school, I still managed to maintain a broad circle. Social ease came naturally to me. I listened. I initiated conversations. He struggled, awkward, withdrawn, simmering with resentment that I could connect where he froze. That resentment metastasized after our 14th birthday. None of his friends showed up for him. I still don't know why, while my friends scooped me up for ice cream and a carefree afternoon. Watching me have a joyful day when he felt abandoned became the trigger for the elaborate campaign that followed. He embarked on a mission to reconstruct the story of who I was, turning me into a monstrous sister who supposedly tormented him out of jealousy. He began spreading whispers at school that I was a spoiled, aggressive girl who beat on him behind closed doors. Then he escalated self-inflicted bruises, a black eye he gave himself, a shoulder mark he produced, carefully curated evidence. The next day, he'd stroll into school, exhibiting the injury like a badge. People rarely question visible marks. They slip easily into a ready-made narrative. Among parents, he'd casually give sanitized, alternate explanations. Football with friends, minor accident. But among peers, he inflated the myth that I was violent. Slowly, conversations shifted. Friends who once laughed with me at lockers began keeping a step of distance. Group hangouts happened without me. Invitations dried up. I felt an invisible film descend between me and everyone else. The turning point was confronting why one of my closest friends had drifted. I asked, and she hesitantly outlined everything he'd been saying, specific, detailed accusations. Hearing it out loud felt unreal. My own twin deliberately constructing a false identity for me, and the lie had grown legs. It wasn't drama anymore. It was systemic reputational sabotage. I approached him, hoping at least for acknowledgement. He smirked, dismissed me, told me I deserved to be alone. The callousness stunned me more than the lies themselves. Rumors trickled upward. Teachers began glancing at me differently. Eventually, it reached the principal. We were summoned. Me, my brother, our parents. I still clung to a naive hope he'd crack under direct questioning. Instead, he doubled down, calmly confirming every invented detail, painting me as a bitter bully upset by parental favoritism. My mother cried dramatically, only not for me. My father praised my brother for his bravery in speaking up. I pleaded, trying to string together words fast enough to puncture the bubble of belief. The principal announced a 10-day suspension for me. Zero tolerance, example to others. I shook, cried, begged for a real investigation. It was like shouting underwater. We returned home, and without ceremony, my father started folding my clothes, tossing things into a suitcase. I asked what he was doing. He declared I couldn't stay under the same roof as his son anymore. I clutched at his leg. He shoved me off as though I were something slimy he didn't want to touch. I begged my brother to speak, but he stood there utterly unmoved, almost entertained by my desperation. My luggage was dumped near the front. I was told I didn't belong there. When my grandmother arrived, she gathered my scattered items carefully, settled me in the car, then marched back and tore into them, threatening to involve authorities if they continued treating me like disposable property. Watching her stand immovable for me was the first moment in that entire nightmare that I felt defended. We drove off. The shock and humiliation sank in later like a dense weight in my chest. Serving the suspension and returning to school was stepping into a cold aquarium. Stares, murmurs, avoidance. I began gliding through hallways with my head down. No lunch companions. No texts. No calls from my parents checking if I was safe. Only my grandmother repeating like a mantra, "Their mistreatment isn't proof you're broken." I finished high school with respectable grades despite everything, channeling energy into survival mode. I promised myself college would be a reset. Arriving at college was like breathing air after a long time underwater. Nobody knew the twisted script for my past. I slowly rebuilt social connections on neutral ground. I explored what I'd suppressed, writing. I had always secretly wanted to craft words professionally, but feared it wasn't practical. To generate income without leaning on anyone, I created freelancer profiles, pitched relentlessly, landed small assignments, expanded into larger projects, and stitched together a portfolio piece by piece. I never asked my parents for money. Even when juggling deadlines and coursework felt exhausting, the autonomy fueled me. By graduation, I'd established solid client relationships. Instead of pursuing a safe corporate track, I chose full-time content writing, blogs, product descriptions, long-form strategy pieces. Multiple recurring clients meant stable revenue. The flexibility let me travel, digital nomad style, collecting cityscapes and cafes as improvised offices. Each flight away from my hometown dulled the ache of the earlier rejection. I saved relentlessly, reinvested in tools, crafted systems to retain clients. Success wasn't an overnight leap. It was hundreds of consistent deliveries, revisions, and polite follow-ups. Throughout this climb, my grandmother remained my chosen family. Leaving her to live independently was bittersweet, but I made weekend visits ritual, shared meals, unhurried porch conversations, gentle domestic chores handled together. She grounded me, and I prioritized being present for her as gratitude, and as love. Recently, I completed a major project for a well-known brand. I'm bound by confidentiality, so I can't name them. After delivering, I asked the internal team for testimonials, collected glowing feedback, and posted curated screenshots on Instagram. Peers amplified it. Inquiries flooded my messages. New websites needing tone, clarity, optimized copy. Relatives, previously in the dark about my entire existence, surfaced with congratulatory notes. Then my former college principal invited me to speak about building a writing career. Public speaking terrifies me, but I accepted. Standing in front of attentive students, narrating the obstacles and the process of building something sustainable felt like a full-circle emotional reconciliation with the younger me who was silenced. Clips of my talk spread across niche groups, resonating with people who had endured family favoritism or emotional manipulation. That led to a spot on a local television segment covering opportunities in content writing. I discussed the compounding value of authentic client reviews, the power of a simple appreciation post, and practical tips for consistent delivery. When the episode aired, I shared select clips proudly. Visibility soared. Apparently, that broadcast became the tunnel through which information trickled back to the people who once discarded me. A few days later, 6 missed calls from my mother. Her name, glowing on my screen, felt ghost-like, familiar yet distant. We hadn't spoken in years. I called back cautiously. The opening was warm. Congratulations, generic catch-up questions. My father's voice entered, suddenly invested. Then the pivot, so how much are you earning? I declined to share specifics. They framed it as innocent curiosity. We're family. When I stayed vague, my mother shifted tone, lamenting retirement, the disrepair of their house, lack of savings, hinting I could help. The entitlement radiated through the line. I told them I wasn't funding anything. Immediately, I was branded ungrateful. My father invoked parental status, implying obligation. Instead of launching into a futile argument, a sharper idea formed. I conditioned any discussion of financial help on a public admission before relatives and family friends that my brother masterminded the false accusations and they had punished me for fabrications. That wasn't about humiliating for sport. It was about truth finally standing where the lie once dominated. Predictably, they urged a private resolution. I remained firm. Soon after, my brother messaged me directly, oozing arrogance. He admitted to lying back then, minimized the impact, it was so long ago, told me to move on, and tried to shame me by referencing the fact I'm unmarried and don't have children, as if that status means I have surplus emotional and financial reserves I owe them. He framed aiding our parents as being a better daughter. The lack of remorse and the manipulative guilt trip solidified my next step. I composed an extensive email to our broader family network. I laid out the chronology: favoritism, escalating emotional abuse, confiscation of privacy, door removal, fabricated injuries, school suspension, the immediate ejection from my home, survival with my grandmother, and the years of silence. I reframed the myth with verifiable detail. Then I attached the screenshot of his recent confession. Clear admission he'd invented the narrative. I emphasized that without my grandmother intervening, I could have ended up homeless and vulnerable. Hitting send released a decade and a half of suppressed truth into a space they couldn't entirely control. The reaction was swift. Relatives who'd accepted surface-level stories expressed shock, regret, awkward apologies for their absence back then. My parents and brother responded with escalating hostile messages, condemnations, attempts at rewriting again, veiled threats. The moment hostility crossed certain lines, I consulted a lawyer. A formal cease and desist letter went out warning them to halt contact or face legal consequences. That legal barrier created the quiet I needed. Communication attempts ceased. Weeks rolled by, and I concentrated on scaling the business. More invitations to speak at panels, niche podcasts, educational sessions for emerging freelancers. Industry relationships deepened. My name began circulating as a credible voice in content strategy. Professionally, momentum felt stable. No single viral spike, just strong, cumulative reputation. I carved out time away from deadlines to stay with my grandmother, immersing myself in her new gardening passion. We discussed the differences between herbs, perennials, pollinator-friendly blooms. Those gentle afternoons, sun filtering through leaves while we exchanged stories, were potent antidotes to the stale emotional scripts of the past. Meanwhile, I began therapy, not because I'm stuck in the past, but to ethically metabolize the residue, the reflexive guilt, the old internalized accusations, the suppressed anger. Choosing structured healing is an act of stewardship over my future. Today, my parents remain silent after the legal warning. My brother is a distant static distortion I no longer tune into. My definition of family is intentional. My grandmother, a few close friends, a professional network built on mutual respect. I no longer chase apologies from people who demonstrated repeatedly they won't provide them. Instead, my life's architecture, resilience, autonomy, creative work, boundaries, is the rebuttal to their old script. People occasionally ask, shouldn't you still help them? They raised you. But removal of a door, verbal degradation, and casting your child out based on staged injuries isn't parenting. It's neglect and emotional harm. The person who performed the role of caregiver was my grandmother. Morally, I don't believe I owe resources to individuals who weaponized authority against a minor and only reemerged when I became financially valuable. My refusal isn't cruelty. It's principled self-protection. Enabling them would reaffirm their distorted model of entitlement. Declining is drawing a line that should have existed long ago. Justice in scenarios like mine rarely looks like a heartfelt apology or cinematic redemption arc. Sometimes justice is building the life they tried to convince you you'd never deserve and safeguarding it from the same hands that once discarded you. I didn't set out to win. I set out to survive, then to heal, then to thrive. And I did. If you're listening while trapped inside a similar maze of manipulation, know this: the narrative they pin on you isn't a prophecy. You are allowed to separate, to define yourself, to succeed quietly or loudly, and to say no without writing a dissertation defending your boundaries. My younger self, crying on a stripped bed after a door was taken, couldn't imagine this version of us. Financially independent, respected in her craft, protected legally, emotionally anchored, loved by the one person who never wavered. That alone is enough. I don't need their validation. I have my own, backed by action. If you're dealing with favoritism, smear campaigns, or emotional exile, document everything. Find even one supportive adult. Invest in your skills, and keep receipts digital and emotional. The long game of truth is patient. And when they try to return solely because you became useful, remember, access to you is a privilege, not a birthright.